building collaboration culture in hybrid teams out of the theory, not the practice. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities of hybrid working. If your organisation is people are mostly working from home, can I have a hands up? Okay. Anybody 50-50, kind of half an office? Okay. And anybody mostly office or on the job based? Oh, two. The commitment and the commute to the commute. How must be tough. So, most people seem to be kind of working from home. There are a lesser number working 50-50 and only a handful working full-time in the office. So how things have changed in the last kind of 5 years. 2 days ago, you might have seen this hit the news. Amazon tells staff to get back to the office 5 days a week because it's better set up to invent, collaborate and be connected to each other. Actually, there's no evidence that that's the case. And actually, Amazon makes the headlines because they're doing this and they're a big company. The evidence actually is more companies are being more flexible and loosening the strings. It makes you think everybody's being brought back into the office because these hit the headlines where the other ones don't. So I suppose in hybrid working, we've been talking about digital for a long time and the tools that you can use to collaborate and share. Some of them are on the screen. I'm sure you use lots of these. We won't debate whether Zoom is better than Teams, but it's definitely not Teams. The technology bit's the relatively easy bit, and it's the cultural bit that's quite different about how you work together in this new environment. And that view of culture, each strategy, is true for anything in an organisation. It's how people act and behave that drives what gets done, not what you write down in a nice document. And certainly not what technology you choose, because ultimately it doesn't really matter what tools you use. Some are better than others, but it's the cultural bit that makes a difference. But I'm not forcing all our teams to switch from Slack to Teams. There'd be an outrage. Our experience at SCVO, I think, prior to 2020, here was us in the office, all having a nice time, eating some nice lollies on a nice summer day, the one that we got in 2019. Most people were in the office, but actually we were set up quite well because we had a couple of staff working in Inverness, some in Glasgow and Edinburgh that generally meet up to have team meetings, but we always kind of catered to those kind of people that were up in Inverness so that they could join in remotely. We had video conferencing, we had Slack before, we had Teams, and we could bring people in remotely. But there was definitely a second-class experience. They were joining us remotely rather than being a kind of truly hybrid thing. But actually having all that technology meant we were really good set up to perform well when the pandemic struck and we went into lockdown. I think this was a picture that I found from the last day I was in the office. Everybody else was at home and we had an all-staff call. I can see John up there. On Zoom. So we were ready to go day one. And actually, I think that was our most effective period for a number of reasons. Everybody was remote. We all had a shared purpose because the pandemic, we know what we needed to do. There was action. Everybody was kind of willing to get on board and tackle that key challenge, and we had a single driver. And people that collaborated together before, because it seemed to be easier when everybody was online, we could just have meetings and it was a new way of working. It was quite exciting. Fast forward to now, and it's gone back to hybrids. Some people are in the office almost all the time. Some people are almost at home all the time. And it's probably the worst of both worlds. I think we're in a bit of a muddle because we've not transitioned to, in the pandemic, we did all the support to people. We did the coffee check-ins, we made conscious effort to build the culture of stuff and do non-worky stuff online, but we don't do that anymore, but as much. But also it's really difficult to do anything in person that we used to do because you're definitely not going for Friday drinks because nobody's in the office. And you are, to drag people in for meetings, people feel that that's a chore if they're being asked to do because we've got very completely flexible policies. So now we've not quite adapted and I think we're probably a bit less effective for that. And actually thinking about ways to do that, to change that, I think we almost went down the wrong path. Like we thought, actually, like our Amazon executives and WebMD people said, actually, let's try and find soft ways to encourage people to come in the office because they'll be more effective and engaged and collaborative by coming into the office. And actually, our hypothesis on that was challenged when somebody went, wait a minute, What do we mean by engagement and what does that look like? And actually, some of our most engaged people in the organisation and most collaborative are the people that are furthest away from us. And Maddie's here. She lives up in Dingwall. So she's furthest away, but she's the most visible person across the organisation because she is proactive. The way she engages she is engaged. And actually, some of the least engaged people come into the office 5 days a week and sit behind their computers and don't talk to anybody in the office or online. So actually, cultural stuff isn't about whether you're in the office or not. It's some of the behaviours that you put around it. I asked ChatGPT what it said about what we should do in a hybrid one to kind of these cultural rituals to build. Don't worry about noting all that. I'll kind of share these slides out. There's quite a lot in them. But I was looking, I was like, actually, we do all this already. I still feel we're not very good, but we do all this. We do celebrating wins. We've got a channel on Teams, which is just for celebrating success, people putting compliments and achievements in there. We have a monthly all town hall meeting where everybody attends on Zoom. The kind of virtual coffees still happen a little bit, not as much as they used to. I mean, where it said, ChatGPT said annual retreats makes us sound like we're going to a spa in France, but we'll have two annual all-team kind of get-togethers in person. So we've got lots of these things, but there's still something missing. And what is that? And I think if we go back to kind of work culture, starting from the thing is actually, when you think about work in general, work, sadly, isn't a happy place for most people. And this workforce report, and talking about UK workers, this is not specifically about charities, but all workplaces, that 60% feel emotionally detached from their work. 38% say their experience is all-day stressful at work. And only 11% of people would say that they're actively engaged with their jobs. So how depressing is that only 10 of us feel passionate about what we do and enthusiastic waking up in a morning. Is that, well, I won't ask you to raise your hands if you feel actively engaged with your jobs, but hopefully it's more than 11% of the room. I think we like to think in the voluntary sector that we're a better employer than most. I'm sure the evidence is not that case because we feel a pressure because we're doing good. We've got vulnerable people we work for often. We feel probably even more stress, more pressure to work the extra hours, to put the job in, to do the job, and actually neglect, as organisations and leaders, the stuff that goes around that. So how dare we spend side time on social time? How dare we spend money on laptops that might improve our jobs? Not thinking about the fact if it takes 15 minutes to boot up in the morning, you're wasting 15 minutes of your time. So we try focus on the service delivery, causes stress. I don't think we're actually much better than private sector or public sector employers, and possibly worse in some cases. So that's not a good starting point for culture. So what does help those 11% of people feel engaged? It's those relationships that you have at work that are really important. 95% of those 11%, what makes a difference is being treated with respect all day. So are you treated by respect with your colleagues and customers, service users, whatever it is? 87% report laughing and smiling a lot at work. Does that feel like your work day? I know I can identify the times I've had a great days at work and it's involved lots of laughing and smiling. The importance of feedback is really important, particularly like if you think about remote thing. Do you get real feedback about how your work has been? Not just positive feedback, but constructive feedback as well. So bosses need to give that. And there's that old quote that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad bosses. That is a kind of mantra that retains true. If you don't get that support, that feedback, that you don't have that relationship, then you're unlikely to stay for long. Talking about people, this is work and friendships are important. We think about professional lives, but actually in that research about those 11%, what's the biggest predictor of engagement is whether someone reports having a best friend at work. So I don't think it necessarily means your BFF that you go out every Friday night, but you've actually got someone that you're very close to. You probably talk about your personal lives, you kind of share things. So that's one of the big predictors. But only 18% of hybrid workers report having a best friend at work. So when you're thinking about things to change, what you can do, how do we stimulate, build friendships? How do you bring you create that environment that allows people to feel happy. This is a picture of me and Sally, our head of digital and development, from Christmas in the office about 5 years ago. Have had lots of good friendships with Sally. It's not as if we're going we have very different interests. She's not accompanying me to the rave and I'm not accompanying her to the ballet. But we get on very well at work and we support each other, even though I'm technically the boss, and we can be friends in the workplace as well as colleagues. And it's sad that 40% of workers don't have a single close friend at work. It's a lonely place, given that how much of our week that we spend there. In terms of that hybrid working, there's such a big mismatch between the expectations of bosses and staff. So again, this is big companies probably talking about, but it probably rings true. And even in the way that we were talking about trying to get people back into the office, that 2/3 of chief executives think their staff will return to the office 5 days a week by 2028. I'm sure in 2021, I said they'll be back 5 days. Next year, I'll get on. But actually 90% of workers don't want to go back to that old way of working for obvious reasons. The commute, the flexibility. Obviously, there is an element of privilege talked about when you talk about remote work, because people working directly with people, if you're working in retail or you're working in a care profession, the actual ability to do hybrid work is a privilege, and it's kind of first place. We need to recognise that. But of the people that have that ability to do it, only 12% of bosses have confidence in their team working remotely. So we trust you to get on and do that when you're working remotely. But actually, on the opposite end of the scale, almost like the complete flip side, 87% of workers say they're fully productive when working from home. So actually, bosses think you're not, and you think they are. Why is that? There's this thing, I think Microsoft coins this term of productivity paranoia, that actually we don't know what productivity means in lots of jobs. How do we measure it? We're not really, there's one voluntary sector organisation in Scotland I know that they got away with the hours that you worked and just set clear objectives. It said, don't care how many hours you work, you've just got to achieve these things. So that's a big cultural change, probably a bit too far for me, but being clear on what you're expected to achieve and monitoring those outputs, it's much better than looking at the inputs and the time that you spend. But actually, that's the thing about being in the office. We measure time based on how quickly people respond to emails, and their visibility doesn't necessarily mean productivity. I've got a kind of slight thing where if people can respond to an email in 30 seconds, you're probably not busy enough. Email is not a phone call. So yeah. And it rings true of ourselves. So how do we measure our own productivity? If somebody asks you how work is, we say 90% of the time, do you answer busy? Busyness is a badge that we like to wear. We're being really busy. We're being busy. But being busy doesn't actually mean you're working hard. And being busy doesn't mean you're actually being productive either. So I think we wear that badges. We're busy, we're busy, we're busy. We like to see ourselves as busy. I know lots of people that we work with, partners that are very busy, but certainly aren't doing any productive work. Nobody in this room, I think, there is that mismatch between busyness and productivity. And actually, a lot of us, I am guilty of this. Who chases inbox zero? Your goal for the day is to try and have less emails than you had than when you came in. And actually, this was me yesterday. I was like, what happens if I get an inbox zero? And look, Outlook rewards you. It says, what a productive day. You've accomplished a lot. What I actually accomplished yesterday was move all my inbox into a separate folder to see what happened. So, we think about, let's get through emails a lot of the time as our badge of productivity. And it's not. I think one of the biggest challenges is around meetings. The average person spends twice the amount of time in meetings that they did just before the pandemic. And for hybrid workers, that's half your time you're spent in meetings. And 71% of meetings are pointless, according to people. Don't need to be involved. What was the purpose of that? And that meeting culture, particularly for hybrid workers, causes stress. it contributes to the busyness. I've had a very busy day because I was in 5 back-to-back meetings, and I grabbed a sandwich when I had my video off for 5 minutes while I was doing it. Well, that was a very busy day. But when you think about it, were all these meetings worth it? What did I achieve that day? My time being used better? And this evidence here that shows when you reduce meetings by a fifth, 20%, your stress goes down 26%. Your feelings of autonomy goes up 60%. Your communication goes up 45%. Engagement up. Productivity up. And if you actually cut your meetings by 40%, that's even boosted anymore. That your stress goes down, is almost halved by cutting your meetings by 40%. So less meetings you have, the less stressed you are, and the more productive you are. So rather than thinking about getting everybody back into the office, how do we have less meetings? And just a quick thing. So if we're lots of hybrid workers in the room, I'm sure you spend most days on a Teams call. Hands up if you've ever, on the past week, have you done something else while on a Teams call? Yep, we're all guilty of it. We're not paying attention to the meeting that we're in a lot of the time anyway, because we like to multitask because we want to be really, really busy. But actually, the studies suggest that 75% of time is lost when you're working on multiple things concurrently. So you're wasting the time being in the meeting, and you're wasting time doing the other thing because you're not really concentrating on either, and you're having to switch your focus. For that video conferencing, there was a phrase coined around Zoom fatigue, and we all know that looking at a screen, watching, having a video conference, feels like it should be the same as interactive, but it's exhausting. Spending 2 hours on a Zoom call or a Teams call you feel drained by the end of it. Whereas, unless you're an extreme introvert, spending 2 hours in a face-to-face meeting or chatting with someone, you're probably less likely. And scientifically, that's because you're picking up on other people's cues, body cues, you're reacting. There's a lot more sensation that goes in that keeps your energy up, whereas you don't get any of that when you're behind a screen. Some organisations, and by God, the Scottish Government seem to be guilty of this, is turning your cameras off in meetings. So have you just stared to the initials? One person's got their camera on, and everybody else is just a silent ray of eggs or dots. That just drains the energy even further. Is anybody? We know we're not paying attention. It feels like those people are definitely not paying attention. And actually, who's talking? It's a disembodied culture of communication. But actually, we worked with a coach before the pandemic and during the pandemic who was really keen on phone calls. So actually, don't get on Teams, pick up the phone and have a conversation, and don't use your eyes, just use your ears. And actually, that's particularly important for really difficult and challenging conversations, because you concentrate much more when you're just listening, and you absorb it more, you react. And we used that, had some very difficult conversations during the pandemic, including have to let people go from the organisation. And all those I did by picking up the phone at a time rather than sit face-to-face on a Teams call. And because people's reactions are hard to gauge, it's difficult. A phone call was actually a better way to explain something, for you to pay attention when you're talking, and for the person listening to pay attention. But how often does your phone ring anymore? Doesn't. People will default to set up a meeting to talk about something. It's just phone me. So rather than thinking about coming into the office, is there something that we can do to think about how we improve the quality of our meetings? We've tried this at SCVO multiple times. Sometimes this works, and then you lose the habit and it fails. So this needs a really conscious thing. And all of what I've said, or half of what I've said, we don't do in the organisation, or we've tried little bits and you just default back. So this really all does take a huge amount of effort to change the culture. But this is one way of doing it, is looking at when you send out a meeting request, are you really clear on these 4 things? The purpose of the meeting. What is the single main goal of that meeting? What are you trying to achieve from it? Is it to discuss a challenge? Is it to source new ideas? What would success look like? What's the outcome from the meeting? Is it a decision? Is it the outline of a plan? is an agreement. And then have you included an agenda that I've said, we're going to spend 15 minutes on this, 15 minutes on that, and 10 minutes on this. Also, why make meetings an hour? Because that's what the diary slots look like. If it only needs to be 30 minutes or 25 minutes or 15 minutes, only do that. And actually, do we consider an agenda by putting the most important items first? We always spend time on the, probably the nice things, the easy things, because we want to lead up to the difficult things and then run out of time to talk about the difficult things by the time we reach the end. And actually, there's this thing that you've heard, like, does this meeting it could have been an email? Could this email have been a phone call? What's the preparation? What do you want to use? That time that we're spending together in a meeting, whether virtually or in person, is really valuable. It's really expensive. What prep can people do in advance to make things go faster? Is there people you want to read things in advance? And is there anything that people could share, like in a collaborative document before, that would help get to the thing? So if you're discussing challenges, why don't people just write them down before you actually come around and say, okay, what's people's challenges with this project? That's a tough one. I'm sure if anybody's been on a board or works with a board, do you expect the board members to read the papers before they turn up to the meeting? I keep trying to convince Anna, our chief executive, to write in our board papers to say, like, free bottle of wine if you reference this quote. But I'm sure all of our board members definitely do read all the papers. Prep. Just use that time more valuable rather than a default position as if we need to do something, let's meet and talk about it. Some organisations are carving out meeting-free days. So it's actually this on Tuesdays. Nobody can have a meeting. Doesn't mean you can be in the office and talk to each other or pick up the phone and chat, but do not set diaried times. Skyscanner that we used to do, that used to support us with something, they call it Maker, I think Maker Wednesdays or something, because they've got lots of coders and people actually building things. So like, okay, that's a really thing to stop people getting interrupted. But it works for lots of different organisations as well, and is part of the thing to change that culture of always just having meetings. I think I like this idea. I had that ChatGPT thing about rituals, and when we talk about organisational culture, it's like, what are the rituals? Talked about meetings there, but what are the things that we do to build culture? And I like this. I'll give you the kind of summary of some of this. I like these five things about what are the purposes, what are the things you can do. So how do we mark change and transition? So what are the things we do when new starters join to build the culture? When new projects begin, what do we do to mark that inception? And what do we do when we shut something down? Do we just go, oh, we're no longer doing that? Or do we create a point in time that says, that was done, celebrate success, or actually acknowledge that didn't go so well. Let's mark that transition. The creativity and innovation, what sessions, what types of events and meetings or things we want to do to spur creativity and innovation. That's probably where we need face-to-face engagement, is because if you want lots of people to spark ideas and suggest things, that is really can often best done face-to-face. When we talk about community, that is that friendship type thing. How do we bring people together just for the sake of being together? If friendships drive happiness and productivity at work, what are we doing to allow that to happen? And again, for us at SCVO, we used to have cake. We had rules for the team, and that like there's always time for cake was number one rule. And we'd sit down, have cake, chat together. That could be marking something. A birthday is quite an easy one to do. Just a Friday. So does anybody fancy a nice lolly? Because it's a hot day. Like that type of thing. How do we build that sense of community, belonging, and connection to each other? It might feel like a luxury, but as we see, it's really not. It's actually helping the productivity. And not everything needs to be good and warm and cozy. Like, what about the conflict and resilience? How do we bring people together to talk about the problems? that we've got, the challenges, there were suggestions here like anxiety. Well, what are we worried about? Like, okay, let's air those problems. How do we have? I mean, in our town halls, for example, at SCVO, we encourage people to submit questions, including anonymously, to say like to the leadership team, say what the challenges they are. And you would think, do we need to have that anonymity? Because people, we think we've got a good culture and people should be willing to share openly, because we're not going to judge you. That's what we think as leaders. But again, we're always open. But the reality is people, no matter how warm and open and fuzzy and friendly your leaders are, if you're going to ask something challenging like, why are we doing this project? Or what's happening with the budget? Or, is there going to be redundancies next year? Or, how are we managing poor performance in teams? Those are the types of questions that have come up. You're not going to really want to kind of share that publicly. So the anonymous questions has often been actually a way to air some things, even though we might feel uncomfortable about dealing with them. And then performance, and that is, every athlete has a warm-up routine and a preparation before they start the thing. So how do we build ourselves up to understand our own performance, that we monitor that, and think about how we improve. So those different types of rituals are, what meetings and events and structures could be for. Recognising that I've rushed through this because I thought I had 40 minutes because I misread the agenda and only have 30. But a final question, to take away would be, what would help you, if we're talking about connection being one of the most important things to culture, not whether you're in the office, not whether you're online or whether you're in person, how would you build that culture which helps you feel more connected to colleagues? What would it be? Do you know? No? Maybe just before we go, I'm going to put on the next slide, but spend a minute talking to the person next to say, actually, what has worked in terms of keeping you connected with your colleagues, and perhaps what more could you do? This, for example, for us, here is Aaron and Jane that work in our funding and digital teams, dressed up as Claudia Winkleman and Claudia Winklewoman. They're great, and we run a kind of team day. It included lots of work planning, but we played a game of the traitors. They had designed this game, and we were rubbish at it. The actual traitors won the game. So we're obviously way too trusting as a team. But that was a real, short exercises that were a bit of fun injected throughout a day, really helped build our connection. So if I actually stole lots of this from Bruce Daisley. There's lots of, if you want to read more, and lots of the facts that sit behind this and all of the reports. These are two really good reports. One is Work in 2020, which talks about that broader thing of work, and Presence digs into this meeting stuff a bit more about how you be present, and that doesn't involve just being in meetings. So I would suggest that. But for now, spend a minute chatting about what would help you feel connected to colleagues with your neighbour. Thank you.